Too many voices. This is part of the very, very important MeToo Military March celebration and observance that we are doing here to help spread awareness and education surrounding military sexual trauma, military culture, and a lot of the implications, just a lot that's happening that it's not just a military issue. It is far from that. We need to be aware and supporting. I am super, super excited to be joined. This is my dear friend. I cannot talk today. This is my dear friend, Kim Sciutto. She is the director and founder of Invisible Combat. She is also a U.S. Army veteran, a prior military spouse, School of Social Work MSW, and I could go all day. I mean, this whole live could just be listing your attributes. But I will go ahead and pass it off to you to see if you want to introduce yourself a little further, a little bit more about Invisible Combat and the incredible work that you all are doing.
Thank you. Yes. First of all, I'm so humbled and grateful to be here. And like I said, I have been having some technical difficulties, so I hope I don't get cut off. But just in case I do, I apologize in advance. But I see my girl Crystal is here. So hey, girl, hey. Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Lauren and me go way back. She was actually, part of the beginning stages of Invisible Combat. I feel like she was there when I started my social media platforms. You were like right there at the beginning stages because I've only had them for a little more than a year. So it's been amazing. My name is Kim. I am, like she said, a social worker. I do have my degree, my master's in social work. I am a U.S. Army veteran. Unfortunately, like many of us, I'm also a military sexual trauma survivor. So I'm a survivor myself, but I also provide services and support to other survivors. And I just want to give a brief history about what Invisible Combat is and kind of where it began before we kind of talk about this really heavy topic. And also to just give a trigger warning because we are talking about a heavy topic. Sexual trauma in general is just a really heavy topic, and make sure you have a safe space to listen. Make sure you have resources. I know Lauren is phenomenal with resources. And if you ever need other resources, especially veteran specific ones, you can always reach out to Invisible Combat. We can provide you, if we don't have the resources in your area, we can find you resources and connect you to resources. So just putting that out there first and foremost before we start. But Invisible Combat, began as a concept of my own healing journey. I'm going to be frank and honest with that. I was in a space between kind of seeking internal validation and healing from my own invisible wounds. So long story short, eventually I found my way to my educational journey and my master's of social work program at the University of Southern California, where I learned a lot about psychoeducation. And that was really important, a pivotal moment in my own healing journey, because I learned a lot about how trauma impacted my body, impacted my mental health, impacted others. And so when I graduated in May of 2019, not only did I just not know what I wanted to do with my life, but also just with my own healing journey internally, because now that I had all these amazing concepts and theories, like how do you apply them to yourselves and how do you help others? That's kind of where I was. And so I had to go backwards into what did I like before the trauma? Who was I before all of this trauma interrupted my life? I like to write, I love to research. I really love to help others. And so that's kind of where Invisible Combat was born. That was the pivotal moment where it was kind of born. And so I started my social media accounts, and Invisible Combat just developed into this beautiful community. I mean, it's a tribe, really. It's a great support community. It's, a place for education, a place for trauma-informed advocacy. We do social support. I can't even describe how amazing Invisible Combat has become and how just supportive the community is. And most recently, I did realize that I could not do it all on my own. That's really important too in your healing journey, that you just can't do everything by yourself. You're only one person. And so two amazing individuals joined my Invisible Combat team. One of them is actually in the comments below, and they're my biggest supporters, my amazing tribe. You know, I added them as co-founders to my organization because we are developing Invisible Combat into a nonprofit. We're going to be bringing, we're excited to say that in the next year or so, we're going to be bringing new advocacy initiatives. We're working on new programs that we're developing with other social workers to bring to our most vulnerable members in our veteran community. You know, we're working on programs for deported veterans. We're talking about incarcerated veterans. We're, you know, we want to get into where are the most vulnerable members of our veteran community, and we want to start there and bring social support and love and compassion to those members of our community.
So powerful, so powerful. Our local global communities are better off to have you and you know, your fellow co-founders here. And anyone here will also be doing some other events with those other co-founders later this month. So check out both Me Too Many Voices and Invisible Combat for details.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't want to miss those because they're going to be great.
Yes.
So yeah, so we'll just hop into it. Like I said, make sure you're safe, make sure you have good supportive resources, especially if you are a sexual trauma survivor yourself. But I think the most important thing when we start talking about military sexual trauma specifically is just defining that term. I think a lot of civilians who want to be good allies, want to be good advocates, they don't know what that means. Like, what does military sexual trauma mean in regards to sexual assault and sexual trauma, right? And civilian sexual trauma and rape and harassment. What are all those terms? Like, why is that different? So military sexual trauma is a term that's used by the Veterans Administration to refer to sexual assault or harassment experienced during military service. So it's specifically military, it's under that military umbrella, but you see how different it could also be harassment or sexual harassment. It's not just rape or sexual assault. So it could be pervasive, threatening. Oftentimes, when we talk about the cultural implications, we'll see it happen in leadership. So we also see that systemic, you know, institutional type of oppression or marginalization within the military structure itself. But yeah, so it's commonly referred to by survivors. We'll hear a lot of advocates, survivors refer to it as MST, the acronym MST. That's military sexual trauma. And the national data from the VA program shows that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 100 men say that they've experienced MST. But of course, we know these numbers do not accurately represent what is probably accurately there, because we know, especially with military members, that not everyone feels comfortable sharing that information, and that many never even report out of fear of whatever they fear, retaliation, shame, guilt, whatever the case may be. Some people never seek support and never seek help, which is incredibly tragic. And it's very tragic, but it's true. That's the reality of the situation. And so going on under the umbrella of military sexual trauma, it could include any sexual activity that you are involved in against your will, which can also include things such as being pressured into sexual activities. And I'm also a sexual assault. I'm also a sexual harassment prevention trainer and diversity and inclusion trainer in my regular day job outside of Invisible Combat. And so, you know, we see this commonly in employment law, you know, type of sexual harassment behavior, such as like quid pro quo or hostile work environment, or like this for that, like especially a supervisor, I'm going to give you this if you give me this, like sexual favors. And it kind of is also does apply here in the military arena. However, it just makes it a little bit more complicated when we're talking about military culture. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about why that structure of military culture makes it a little bit more complicated. But because of that military culture and leadership or policy roles within the military setting, it does get a little bit more hostile work environment setting, because it kind of creates this oppressive environment where it makes it really difficult for victims to heal. It makes it really difficult for victims to advocate for themselves, to advocate for others, as opposed to our civilians. which do have the Equal Employment Opportunity Office and do have those legal avenues or civilian courts sometimes, that makes it not easy, but a little bit more accessible than the military justice system, the way that that's set up. And some of those are outdated laws that need to be addressed, which Crystal, my wonderful co-founder, will be discussing that on the 30th. I think she'll be discussing our policy and legal advocacy. And that's when she'll kind of dive into like what's out there right now and why we need change in the policy and advocacy setting. But just know there's a lot of change that needs to happen. We have a lot of outdated policy and regulations, and that's why it's so difficult for survivors to find justice in the military justice setting. But yeah, so MST, also, like I said, could be harassment or sexual harassment. And so when we have young service members or members that are coming into the military, sometimes we have co-ed barracks. So we can see a lot of issues with that. Sometimes a lot of our youth are coming into the military with social emotional skills, or maybe fluid balance, what is okay, what's not okay. We put them in this co-ed setting with some of the military culture, things that we kind of it becomes norm in the culture. And then they start thinking this is the norm. This is the type of behavior. Or am I freezing?
You're a little pixelated, but I can hear you. I can hear you. You have not frozen yet.
Because you're getting a little frozen, so I feel like I'm freezing a little bit. As long as you can hear me, I'm okay with looking pixelated.
Same. I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so then we don't get the training. Then we have the training issues. There's not a lot of training in the social emotional areas when we have young soldiers coming into the service. And that can be, like a breeding ground for long-lasting negative implications when you start introducing sexual trauma of any type in any of these types of scenarios, harassment, and then the assaults and other things like that. So, it's also, I think it's really important right now to note that although many in the advocacy community and in this space, it's commonly thought to be a female-only problem. A lot of people, a lot of civilians, you see them advocating and see them, doing a lot of advocacy for military sexual trauma survivors, but a lot of them, assume that it's female only or that's a woman only issue, but it isn't. It's not, oftentimes that's a really grossly inaccurate perception. Oftentimes male service members do not have safe spaces because of this stigma right here, this well-intentioned stigma that female service members are the only ones that have sexual trauma. But there's a huge stigma, the limited data, it's very skewed. A lot of male service members don't come forward because of that stigma. So it's always something to keep in mind when we're educating, when we're advocating, when we're supporting veterans in this community, is to keep that in mind, that male service members are just as likely to be sexually assaulted and have residual effects as female service members are as well.
Thank you for that.
I talked a lot. So do you have anything to add to that? I feel like I talked at you a lot.
You're saying all such good things. I'm like at rapt attention. It's like, yes. And I think it's also, and something that actually I had an event, so last week, I've kind of lost track of time these past few weeks with Decruit, again, part of this MeToo military march. We were talking about how oftentimes people who join the military, they already are going in there with existing trauma, maybe adverse childhood experiences, and they're going into the military to try to find that structure or family, and then they walk into these scenarios that they and how that just piles on to the trauma. And I was just that's been in my mind a lot, and especially hearing you talk and how then they end up getting harmed even more. It's really sad.
It's additional compounding traumas. And then when we talk about, because in a little bit, I'll talk about the residual effects of how long-term and how long-lasting these traumas can be as they move on and transition out of the military. Because when we transition out of the military, there's already a lot of issues just coming back and reintegrating back into civilian world. And then when you add in trauma, not even mentioning combat related trauma, just if we're just talking about military sexual trauma specifically, we're already talking about trauma. And then if they have any pre-existing military, pre-existing trauma from their childhood, sexual trauma, community trauma, anything else that maybe layer on top of that, now you're getting complex PTSD and other issues that maybe would be a little bit more intense. Services are needed. And sometimes the VA is limited in their resources in treating that type of trauma. So it can get really complicated really quickly. So it's really important when you're supporting survivors, especially military survivors, to just be aware of all of those different compounding layers, what we call like intersectionality or just layers of trauma that could potentially be there under the surface, right?
No, thank you for expounding upon that.
Yeah, so I think it's really important for advocates and allies to understand why military sexual trauma is so impactful. And I think a lot of that is because of the cultural implications of military service. And there are some reasons for that. And I think the importance of just understanding military culture when supporting MST survivors is crucial to understanding like the root causes and the long-lasting consequences and impacts to survivors. Some scholars feel that the patriarchal structure of the military and the emphasis on like the masculine ideals kind of encourage some notions of dominance and aggression. And then when added to like the power differentials of like the masculine versus feminine, the men versus women in the military structure, it can kind of lead to that normalization of the sexual language, the sexual behavior, because we see that often when, kind of sexual harassment is just the norm in some environments, not in all, but in some of the, military environments, the work environments, the everyday life, you'll see some of those sexual harassment patterns. Like for me in my civilian employment sector now, those things wouldn't fly. I would be getting all kinds of discrimination complaints in my department if those things were happening. But in the military culture, it was just the norm. That was just what happened. And so we see this normal behavior that kind of became the norm. And so added to the lack of accountability for poor behavior and the lack of support for survivors who do find the courage to speak out, this can just enable and encourage that toxic masculinity and hostile work environment, that culture. And then it can lead to cultural acceptance among service members. Because, once you have that fear that nothing will be done, we know what's left, acceptance, right? And then what's left after that? Hopelessness, right? And then some people never get past that hopelessness. And that's when you start getting into the mental health issues that we are going to talk about in a minute, the suicidality and some of the other hopelessness factors that kind of go into, well, what are we supposed to do if we have no justice, if we have no avenue to get out of this, And then we get into this whole thing of leadership. And oftentimes, we see that it's leadership that can be the perpetrators of some of these sexual assaults and sexual harassment behaviors themselves. And we tend to see grooming practices and patterns where those who are higher ranking or those who have power, over others, maybe junior enlisted or people who are lower ranking, and can manipulate them into feeling isolated or trapped because they don't have safe reporting structures or they don't have someone outside of their chain of command that they feel safe to report to. Similar to that quid pro quo that I was saying, however, within military culture, you said you don't always have that option of safe reporting spaces to disclose. And over time, when service members see examples of perpetrators getting away with these crimes, victims' mental health diminishing, leadership looking the other way, hopelessness can just become the norm. And it's like I said, it's so tragic. And in military culture, many victims will be forced to work alongside their perpetrators, kind of different than employment sometimes, because I know for us, we'll move victims to different areas. But usually in the military, sometimes if you don't disclose it or you're afraid to disclose, sometimes you're kind of forced to work with that individual. And maybe other people who are looking the other way and invalidating your experience. You're forced to kind of just live and work with them. And so there's no safe form of recourse for some individuals, except to internalize it basically and just kind of soldier on, quote unquote, or become more resilient, because the military focuses a lot on resiliency, which, you know, to the defense is really good in terms of, you know, combat stressors and things like that. We do have to focus on strength and resiliency. But in terms of military sexual trauma or things like that, sometimes that can be detrimental because, you know, you're soldiering on and you're becoming more resilient, but are you internalizing this? You have safe spaces to disclose. Are you able to seek support? And no, there isn't safe places to disclose, and there isn't safe places to seek support. Which ironically, you know, well, yeah. So, but what's the cost, right? The cost is your own mental health and your own well-being. So it's incredibly detrimental. And then this whole concept of unit cohesion. So I know the last time you and I spoke, I did that webinar with you. That was like the first time I ever spoke, actually. So I was talking a lot about unit cohesion. And one of there's a cultural factor to consider. It's like a root cause underneath like the military structure is this idea of unit cohesion. Because reporting a sexual assault, no matter how egregious it is, it could be horrendous, terrible, but it can still feel like a betrayal to the team, to your unit, as a victim. So it's almost as if you feel like you're going to be the one that disrupts the whole unit, right? Even though it sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but when you're in the middle of like a systemic oppressed system, it's like you just have no, like you feel like you're going to be the one that destroys the whole unit. And that can just add another layer of moral conflict to yourself, another layer of guilt and shame that we know already exists with sexual trauma survivors already. And so it just adds another complicated internal structure that you're trying to heal. And it's not a healing environment at all when you have that extra layer of shame and guilt that's already kind of there.
Yeah, and especially because, again, not all units, but a lot will retaliate or be mad. Absolutely. Because they do see that as a betrayal for their unit. Absolutely. So it is so real. You know, I hear you say, you know, it maybe sounds ridiculous, but it's very real, very real.
It is. It's super tragic. I mean, this is when we talk about hostile work environments, these are the toxic work environments. And, you know, because when we talk about mental health, you know, this is why some individuals feel like suicide is their only way out. This is why sometimes we have that internalized grief and shame that lasts long term after they leave service. And this is why sometimes those residual transitional effects, once a service member leaves service, can kind of last long term because of those moral conflicts. What we call it moral injuries, right, can happen even to victims and survivors. And then we have this psychological, I guess, instance of groupthink, where it could also contribute to moral injuries for individuals who are not necessarily the victim, but maybe those who are bystanders or those who are on the outside looking in. And I can speak in terms of my own experience as well on this, but it's groupthink. It's the practice of thinking or making decisions as a group in a way that discourages creativity or individual responsibility. So like, you know, other people striving for inclusiveness, and maybe bypassing your own morals or your own beliefs just to kind of fit in with the outside group. So I know when you, in terms of like unit cohesion, somebody maybe like not believing that this is right, but still kind of going along with it because, well, that's kind of what is supposed to happen, or that's what I'm supposed to do. So a real-time example, when I reported my sexual trauma, my sexual assault, and other people in the unit found out about it, it was almost like a form of groupthink, like a form of bullying kind of started occurring, that people which wouldn't talk to me. Like they get up and walk away when they saw me coming, nobody was to eat. It was really bad. Like they just didn't want to be associated with me. They didn't want to be seen with me. They didn't want to speak to me. And years later, you know, sadly, years later, had approached me and they had told with them later on. And they had explained to me that the reason why they kind of felt that way is because that same individual that I had accused of assaulting me had done inappropriate behavior toward them as well. And they saw what happened to me. and they're like, we don't want any of this. We just want to not be a part of this. So then therefore they kind of went along with everybody else, and everybody else kind of blackballed me. So therefore that's just what happened. And so that was a moral conflict for themselves. Imagine if something had happened to me, or if something tragic had happened to me, the moral conflict that they may have internalized because of them not speaking up or them not saying something. So, and that happens, tragically, that happens to individuals. So in terms of moral injuries and mental health conditions, it can also happen to those who don't speak up, who are bystanders looking in units, who maybe are morally conflicted and feel like I should have said something, but I didn't say anything. And that's part of that unit cohesion, that group think, that psychological conditioning that happens within military culture and structure.
Someone chimed in the comments, go along to get along. We're
Absolutely.
a little technical difficulties. Can you hear and see me okay?
I can hear you.
I
can hear you now.
I don't know. I was just saying that I'm not sure how much, if you heard any of that, but so apologies if you've already heard this, and for everyone who else maybe did hear it. But I'm not trying at all to compare the film industry, the entertainment industry to military cultural at all. But what you said resonated so much with me. How, people could not associate with me in order for them to keep going in their career. They saw what happened to me when I tried speaking out, and they felt like, as hurtful it is, I understand they need to protect their careers, their livelihood, and how, that contributes to the lack of support. And then I was saying, but I can only imagine with how much, what I saw in the entertainment industry, but how much that's expounded upon within the military culture and the structures that are put up. I mean, it's really heartbreaking to think about.
No, and there's no, it's okay, because I think that there's so many similarities, and that's why, survivors across any genre, any type, that's why we resonate with each other so well, and we can connect so well, just because, we've experienced military sexual trauma, oppressive systems, our oppressive systems, right? And we can resonate, and we can feel that pain and that empathy. And I think that's universal, right? So it's understandable that you would resonate with that and feel that. Yeah, because it is, and it wasn't fun, and it happens so often, and it's tragic. It really is, that we still in 2021 have these issues of like lack of empathy and it's not, you're right, it's a survival technique. Like when I was talking to those females and they were explaining to me how they couldn't say anything because they didn't want to be labeled the same way that I was labeled, immediately it's like this understanding. I get it. I understand you have to survive. It's a survival technique. You adjust accordingly to your environment. It's just unfortunate that your environment has to be so hostile that you have to adjust accordingly to that, right?
Agreed.
Really
I wanted to check in if anybody has any questions, comments. Feel free to throw them in the chat. This is so educational and informative. I think a lot about how, we ask, people to join the military, to protect, to defend, to, share relief, so much more. I know that the military does, and all the sectors do, branches do so much more than that, but that we ask people to literally fight for our country, and then we're not going to protect them when these things happen. It really makes me mad. It really does. And how much of this is covered up because of the major power differentials within the military and beyond. It's just, like you said, it's really tragic.
Yeah, and we see, I know recently, I don't know if any of the people that have joined, we kind of see this now in the civilian population, kind of becoming more aware of these issues. Like for us, we've known these have existed for years. I know because some of the advocates that I work with and that I had the pleasure, the opportunities to know and get to know and work with, they've been working in this field for forever. It feels like forever they've been doing this work, this advocacy work, asking for help and asking for community support, and we haven't really gotten there. No policies have been implemented, no laws have been changed, until recently when some really public cases have gone viral because of social media, which is amazing. It's great. Unfortunately that this had to happen. I mean, it's so bittersweet, right, to see something like this, because it's so triggering for all of us in this community to see such a tragic situation happen, and then have potential justice for all of us kind of in the shadow of it. But that it brought it to the forefront for so many of us, and we really needed the civilian allies. We needed the education, the community education. We needed people to understand that yes, the military has systemic issues. We've known this for years. We've lived it. We've been in this for a long time. Now other people know this, and hopefully, with the education and this continuum of discussion and this development of conversations, we can bring awareness and continue this conversation until change can happen. And then once change happens, continue the conversation until it continues to happen, because there's so much. I mean, this system needs a lot of change. There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen. Yes.
Yeah. And absolutely. You all knew this was going on. It's not that it wasn't happening. Now, more people are just being more aware, like you said, with the advent of, more things going public with social media. And it makes me so sad that it's like how many people have to be harmed, and then there's a big public case, and then people finally start paying attention to it. Honestly, I'm at a loss for words over it. It's just action. It's always been going on. Now more cameras are just pointed at it, but still, so I mean, it's still, I can't imagine. I mean, truthfully, and I say this, I feel fortunate that I have a choice whether I join the military or not here. I do not think I would last a day at all. I know this about myself. I have a lot of great skills, but thinking about joining the military and then experiencing harassment, sexual assault, and then with all the infrastructures, there's power differentials. How do you come forward? How do you speak out about that when the price is so, so high and you keep seeing people being harmed for speaking out? It's
yeah, it can make it really difficult. I mean, and it's not our advocacy that we do is not to deter people, not to deter women from joining the military, because there are some amazing women who have had amazing careers and did amazing things in the military. And this is not the experience for everybody. I know that there are some women, and there may be some on this thread or that watch this video that will say otherwise, that they've had amazing experiences in the military. And so this is not the experience for everybody, but the data, I mean, the numbers, right? They show that there is a high number of individuals who have experienced this. I mean, me included. I know from personal experience that this happens. I've seen it with the people that I worked with, and the people that I support. And it has long-lasting, devastating consequences. So of course, change needs to happen. And I know there's other advocates who really advocate for more women and more individuals to come in the military, right? To kind of to change those power differentials, and to kind of advocate and bring light to that. And we do that on our page on Invisible Combat. We tend to, I know this month is military, or not military, it's Women History Month. So we've been highlighting amazing women in the military and some of our future generations of military, up and coming military leaders that are women. So it's not to say that the military isn't a space for people. You know, there's amazing things that you can do. I mean, I was a medic. I did amazing things. I saved lives. You know, that you can't get over that. That was an amazing experience. Yes, there was a trauma that happened to me while I was in the military, and you know, I'm using my voice now to make change and to advocate. So, you know, I never want to deter anyone from joining the service, but I do want to make sure that they know their resources, that they know that there's safe places to disclose. There's people out there that's fighting for them, that they shouldn't have to feel unsafe, and that we are working hard behind the scenes to make change happen, to make policies happen, and to create safe spaces for them. You know, we won't stop fighting until that happens. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. And, you know, we need people. You know, I'm so grateful for people like you, everyone before you, everyone after you who does serve in the military. Truly, it's so important.
But it's not for everybody, yeah.
I did not mean to sound disrespectful.
No, you're not. You weren't at all. No. Absolutely not.
I to my part as a civilian to help.
Yes, you're back.
Yeah, I want to. Now I forgot what I was going to say. But I want to do my part as a civilian to make these necessary changes so it is safer.
Absolutely.
So as I said, it's not just a military issue. It's an issue that civilian, military, that we should all be focused on and trying to make changes for.
Absolutely. Because then we see, you know, we were talking about the residual effects of military sexual trauma and how long lasting those implications can be. And sometimes they can stem out into our veterans, you know, after we leave service. You know, we see things like post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, anxiety, substance abuse disorders are huge in the veteran community, especially after a military sexual trauma. Those comorbidities where they have, you know, mental health conditions as well as substance abuse or maybe homelessness, things like that. Because what we know is that there's a high demand for mental health care in the VA systems. I mean, they had to make the term military sexual trauma because there were so many that were coming forward in the VA system to say that they had post-traumatic stress disorder or other mental health concerns because of MST. So we know that there is a huge need in our veteran community specifically for support and resources. And then, you know, we have, I mean, 40% of homelessness are homeless women. Veterans have experienced MST, according to the VA. And veterans with MST history are over twice as likely to have experienced homelessness. So homelessness is a residual effect of MST. We have, you know, higher rates of suicidality with people who just experience sexual assault, you know, and then with military sexual trauma. And then, of course, I'm really interested, you know, me being most people, I don't know if anyone in this that's following or watching this knows this about me, but you and I have spoken about this on our last webinar that we did. I'm previously incarcerated. I'm a previously incarcerated veteran. During my transitional phase between the military and my healing journey into my educational journey. And so veteran incarceration is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And, you know, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, there are currently about 180,000 US veterans in our prison or jail system. And about half of them are incarcerated due to mental health issues and substance abuse issues. So in 2017, I want to say that the rate of women veterans involved in the criminal justice system was beginning to rise. And there's not a lot of data concerning women veterans in the criminal justice system, but I mean, I'm one of them. You know, I'm one of the, I guess I could say the successful ones that was able to be rehabilitated and go on to finish my education and go back to serve in my community. But it's tragic that there's others that have never been able to get out of that cycle of criminal justice. And sometimes, a lot of times, the data shows that a lot of them have experienced military sexual trauma and have gotten into homelessness, and got into that cycle of criminal justice system, substance abuse, homelessness, financial issues, things like that. And so that's another residual side effect or symptom, right, of military sexual trauma, and how long lasting those implications can really be. Because now we're talking about after the military, after they transition out, as they're continuing on in their life. Sometimes it's hard to even be able to continue and have a normal life after service. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that, I talked about in the workshop I did with Decruit last week is, they recruit you and they get you programmed in, but they never decruit you. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of resources to acclimate you back to civilian society. And if you're bringing all this trauma with you, I mean, you're going up against the odds.
Absolutely. Yep. I agree. I love that though. I wasn't able to catch that, but I love their mission statement. I think it's amazing what they do. Yes.
I am actually on adding captions to that, and that will be available on my website.
That's
and
awesome.
All for you for folks who missed it. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I mean, maybe enjoyed is not the right word because it is really heavy and sobering, but no, I've enjoyed talking to you. I stand by it. I enjoyed talking to you.
Hopefully it was educational. I hope that people got something out of it. I mean, I think it's just important, especially as we move forward, in how do we best advocate for military trauma survivors, and how do we best become civilian allies, and how do we, even as military sexual trauma survivors ourselves, how do we best advocate for ourselves, and how do we become more aware of these terms? Like I said, psychoeducation for me was incredibly healing. So it's just, about educating ourselves and educating others, and being more aware, right?
Thank you. And again, if anyone has any questions, comments, feel free. While we wind things down, is there anything else that you would want us to know? Any ways that, and we will be exploring more as far as intersectionality and legislation efforts in future lives with your co-founders of Invisible Combat. But for this live, is there anything else that you would want us to know? Any ways that we can support? And how do we find Invisible Combat? We're loving Invisible Combat. Where would people go to find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, right now, because like I said, we're in the process of finalizing our nonprofit status. So that's going to be we're in the process of that. So that's taking a little bit of time. But in the meantime, you can find us on Twitter. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram, and we're on Facebook at Invisible Combat. All three places. We do have a Facebook group that our wonderful Crystal, who's on this, I see her. She said, "Great job. Thank you so much." She moderates that for us. It's called Justice for Vanessa Guillen. And it's a group that we talk a lot about policy advocacy and just things that are happening in our veteran community, especially in regards to military sexual trauma specifically. So if anyone wants to learn more about that part of our advocacy campaigns and what we're doing, that's a great group to join on Facebook. And then we also do have a support group. We are working on getting moderators for that group currently, but we do offer some support there. It's I think it's Invisible Combat Women Support Group on Facebook. So if you want to reach out to us, we'd be more than happy to point you in the direction of those groups. Or if you need any other resources, feel free to contact us. And if you want to collaborate or anything like that, then just send us an email at invisiblecombatops@gmail.com. Yeah.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a light. Thank you for being such a wonderful friend to me. Thank you for being such a wonderful friend to this entire community. Thank you for all the work you and Invisible Combat do. And again, I am Lauren with Me Too Many Voices, and this has been part of the
MeToo Military March, which has been aiming to spread awareness and education surrounding military sexual trauma and culture. I feel like I am more aware and educated after this time with you, Kim. And again, everyone, this is Kim Sciutto, founder and director of Invisible Combat. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks.
Thank you all for joining us today on this Friday. Be safe out there. Thanks. Bye.